Yes, yes. So first I want to say thank you very much to all the speakers. It's after hours and we're still committing time. Uh, I mentioned before, I think it's something that's urgently needed, which is supporting academics to run away into the industry as fast as they can. But I think it's best just to hear the experiences of people who've done just that. So we might start with going through the program, Ryan, Chris, Susan, and then finishing off with Joseph from the recruiting end. So are you able to share your slides, Ryan? I saw you say something, but I suspect you're muted.
Jeez, rookie mistake. Yes, I said, let's try. How are we? Is that up? Yep, cool. All right, so thanks for inviting me, guys. This is a topic that I think a lot of us here are pretty passionate about. And it's not just moving or running away from academia, as Joe said. It's about considering what career you want to have for yourself and knowing that there are options. I think that's the biggest thing. Sometimes we don't know there are options, and there is plenty of them out there. Finding the right job is maybe hard, but there are options out there. So the first slide, I thought, not to be too devastating to people, but now is an amazing time to be thinking about transitioning from academia out to industry. And that's for a couple of reasons. Industry is going pretty well, to be honest. There's a few jobs out there, but also on the other side of that, you know, the shortcomings of academia have really come forward and shone light in the last 12 to 18 months. So there's a lot of titles out there from different places. The one that struck me, less security than a barista for early career researchers in Australia. I had a giggle, but it did also resonate. So it's I wouldn't say it's all doom and gloom, but it's a great time to start considering what else is out there, if that's what you want to look for. I did think before I presented this, you're not just going to take my word for it. So what about we have some words of wisdom from other people? Many of you are going to know Shri, now a lab manager at Channel Bio. And basically I asked all three of these people, what's the biggest difference you found in switching from an academic role into industry? And for Shri, it was acknowledgement of his time. So putting in the hours, yep, but sometimes in academic roles where it's part and parcel of the job. And if you don't do it, in fact, you're not doing your job. He's found that in industry that he's being acknowledged for that extra time he's putting in. So that he's finding that a bit more rewarding. Carmen, amazing girl that I've been working with at Thermo in my last role. She was saying she misses science a lot. Of course she does. We all miss the lab, but she's the biggest change for her is that she's learned to be a bit more practical in the way she runs her day. And I've got a little bit about that in another slide. And for Shannon, application specialist now with Zeiss, he just left ANU last year. He said the biggest difference for him is his demeanor. He's finding he's actually a little bit more happy. He's a little bit more clear with his focus at work. And it's because there are clear certain endpoints that he can then work towards and achieve. Sometimes we get stuck in between projects, I suppose, when we're in the lab and we never have that clear endpoint. So that, for him, that resonated. I thought I'd also give you a quick background of what I've done and why I transitioned. So starting back in 2004, doing a biological science degree, moving through the process, did honors because I was already there, did PhD because I was already there, and kept in that cycle. And it wasn't until basically funding got cut towards the end of the PhD that I started looking for a role, and I landed a job with the Red Cross Blood Service, now Lifeblood. Was there for 5 years, moved on to Thermo Fisher as an account manager, and now with Cytec Biosciences as a technical sales specialist. So I've kind of covered academia, industry, and a subset of industry we can call commercial, which is a little bit more, I suppose, customer sales focused. The training over that period of time has been very broad. And part of the reason why I didn't stay in academia, I started learning about transcriptomics in honors and then had to move on to mammalian cell culture and flows and Westerns in the second half of my PhD. And then through the blood service, we started looking at more clinical trial work, focusing a little more on project management as well, so and lean principles of lab. That sort of resonated with me a lot more than the bench. I started looking at more of a management sort of perspective, and spent my time, I suppose, talking to a lot of reps as well that are out in the field. So as I said, the first part of my career in academia was tumultuous is a nice word. Joe can tell you more, he was there. It basically ended up with me having very little progress and very little focus in my career. Having a supervisor fired halfway through your PhD will do that. So in order for me to get out of academia and into industry, I put out more than 50 resumes, applied for more than 50 jobs, spoke to 3 or 4 different recruitment agencies, spent 3 or 4 months trying, landed 4 of those 50 interviews, and it might be because my resumes weren't great at the time, but it is a very competitive market. And I focused mainly on where my skills were at that point, and some places I thought would be also good to work at. I definitely say as a hot tip in that instance, practice interviewing, and I've given this spiel to many. Don't be afraid to apply for jobs, even if they're not 100% the thing that you want. You need to get out there and practice. You don't want to miss that perfect opportunity because you're freaking out in an interview. So you can practice with friends and family, sure, but there's nothing like the real thing. And you've got to learn to sell yourself, not being cocky, but being confident. Stressing what work you've done, not the work the team has done. And also acknowledging that no one cares about that one gene you've researched for 5 years other than you. You need to learn to talk about how you looked at that gene and not that gene itself. On the other end of that, when I go out and visit people, it can be very tough understanding what that person's talking about because I don't understand that gene myself. So my first role at the blood service, what I really learnt as a difference between academia and industry was that you need to be a team player. There's generally clear business goals that are in place. There's clear KPIs. So you need to think a little bit more as a team player. I find in academic roles we're a little bit more self-absorbed because that's what we have to do for the funding, right? It's just a different mentality. You need to change your mindset a little bit and be a bit more 9 to 5 as well. And I've just got some pictures of my life in the lab for 5 years. One thing about industry is you're generally not short of funding for new equipment, so you can see the lab's pretty stacked. That's what I found. But you might also find that work is a little bit more routine. In commercial, very different. So part of industry, but as I said, it's probably a little bit more customer facing, a little bit more sales revenue based. Very similar to industry, except there's this need to have more personal drive. So you need to be that person that really drives your own career because no one else is going to do it for you. And the one thing that comes up, and I hate the words because they were basically a meme for the last 24 months, but adaptability and resilience. Now that I look back on my time at Thermo Fisher, yeah, really important, being able to adapt to change and being resilient to it, not just resilient to change itself, but other people's ideas, because you're a part of a big organization and you may not always agree, but you've got to be resilient to that and go along with it. Project management then becomes a key as well. And having that time as money mentality is hard for some people. So I think that's really important to note for those thinking about changing, understanding if you're okay with that time as money mentality. Also have to be okay with early mornings and late nights. So it's not uncommon to wake up at 4 and get home at 10:30 because you've got something else you've got to do at Brisbane or Perth or wherever it might be. And that time is money mentality, so things just have to happen. So you have to be okay with getting up very early. One thing I struggled for was what roles to actually look for, because we all use different different terminology in different industries. So you still have RAs, senior RAs, and all those sorts of things. You start seeing words like scientist and specialist, which can mean the same as an RA or an RF in some cases. You might have terms like account manager or account specialist, technical specialist, marketing specialist, development. These are all things that scientists can do in industry and those commercial roles. And you also need, I think, to look at pay scale. It's really important to know what to expect and to talk about it with friends and family, because it is, you know, we don't do a job for free. So it's really important, I find, to know that. What I haven't put on there is roles in medical science liaison, CRO, that sort of work. I know that some of our other guys on here have that background. I myself don't. So hot tip number 2, put in the hard work early. If you're considering changing in 6 months or 12 months, start now. Start applying, talking, reaching out now, writing the resume now. As I said, it took me a good 3-4 months to move. And even when you get offered a job, it can be another 2-3 months before you start. So it's really important to get out there and do things now. I've also found that career progress and change is a bit easier in industry than it is in academia. So why consider? Firstly, it's not a negative thing. My mum thought I was throwing away my PhD when I left the lab. I wasn't. I've learnt more about science and more science in general now that I've left than I had in the lab. There is no dark side. You know, whether you're working for a big corporate like Thermo or a pharmaceutical company, there is no dark side of science. Work-life balance, I wouldn't say you do less hours, but I find that it's been more manageable, more tailored, so I can do things a little bit more on my time, I suppose. And obviously remote work options, you're not at a bench, so you can actually work from home sometimes. But it can be tough, so the volume of work can be overwhelming. I've been known to put in 60 to 80-hour weeks because you got to get the job done. And, you know, that's generally at the start and it slows down over time, but it can be tough. It can feel stagnant as well because it's maybe not as vibrant as academic roles can be. And it's tough to change mentality. You've been in a lab role for a very long time or in an academic lab role for a very long time, and things are done differently outside the lab. So it's tough to change that mentality. I think my biggest tip is if you are serious about changing, get active now. Social media, LinkedIn is the big one for me, and email active. So get out there and actually email friends, family, people like myself in roles that you might know. I changed because I became friends with people in industry. That's what made me move and know that I could. The benefit of that is recruiters then contact you for roles. The latest role I had, I wasn't looking, I was contacted. And it also helps recruiters know who you are and what you're doing. Know your worth. So it comes back to pay scale for sure, but it also comes back to the role that you're worth. And I think sometimes we undersell ourselves a little bit. And obviously expand your network, get out there and talk to others. And if at any time you want to talk about anything relating to moving on, contact me on LinkedIn. That's the first step. Make sure you've got a profile. I'm on there daily. So please contact me. I'm always open for these conversations. I've had many in the last 4 years. And it's one of the things I am very passionate about. So that's it. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. I can't agree with your tip 3 anymore. Joseph Cox, you've been really helpful, you know, as a recruiter and kind of guiding me and giving a few helpful tips that were completely foreign to me. So I can't agree more. If anybody has any questions, please speak up now, or we might just move on to Chris. I see no hands raised. Brilliant. I might hand over to you, Chris.
Sorry, everyone. I'll just quickly get my presentation up. This worked a lot better when we were in testing phase. Can everyone see that?
Yep, it's looking good.
All right, well, thanks very much for giving me some time. I don't think I know anyone but maybe one other participant here today, but I'm really honored to have an opportunity to speak about something that I'm particularly passionate about. It was a really hard decision, and I wish I had closer mentors to kind of help me with the transition or to have an open conversation. I think it was a really hard time. I had a lot of conversations with other PhD students, other postdocs, and other supervisors and mentors who really wanted, were almost encouraging me to stay in academia despite, withering career prospects. Almost, I think, as a way to validate the career choices that they've made, or maybe because of a lack of awareness of what they've had. So really resonate with what Ryan was saying about reach out, have conversations with people, and have a feel about what's out there. What I wanted to talk to you all today about was really my journey and some of the roles I've had, and kind of try to broaden your view about what's out there. And, there's lots of different paths, and some of them are completely unrelated to science. So you've just got to get out there and have a look and feel. Yeah, so my background is pretty traditional, like probably most of you have experienced. I have a Bachelor in Animal and Veterinary Biological Sciences from the University of Sydney, graduated with honours, went on to work as an RA, which you can see. So it's not just a lie, that's a picture of me in the lab. You can find that on Google Maps, I think. There's a virtual tour of the Garvan Institute. So I worked as a research assistant for a few years, and then transitioned into a PhD, because I think that's kind of what you do most of the time, because you want to kind of get access to maybe becoming a postdoc and then, a long-term career academic. But after a while, I realized that maybe I wasn't going to be competitive as an early career researcher. I felt like I had an entrepreneurial spirit that I wanted to kind of exercise. And I wanted to kind of work at the intersection of science and business and see if the science that we were doing could actually have more of a clinical impact. But it wasn't all lost. There were some key learnings, and there's some skills that you can take away from that time. So I would say don't squander your time in academia while you've got it, if you've got funding and things. So it is a once in a lifetime opportunity to kind of contribute to the way knowledge, or at least, contribute to the generation of new knowledge. And, some of that is really exciting stuff. If you're at a point in your life when you don't have kids and mortgages and things, and you can devote time to that, it's a really exciting time. So don't squander it too much. But use that time wisely. So invest time in your research, but also invest in yourself a little bit. So start thinking about soft skills that you can develop, or other bits of education that you could be doing that might help you become more employable in other industries that you're interested in. Joe will talk about MSL, and there's a bunch of other roles later on, or medical affairs, and there's a bunch of other training courses that you could be doing. They're not too all time consuming. There are lots of transferable skills that you can develop during this time. So have a think about industry actually does demand some of these things, like research and data analysis, critical thinking, autonomy and self-motivation, the ability to problem solve, and resilience. You're building all of these right now, and you'd be surprised at how many people who have come through a more traditional industry path will lack some of these skills. So, you can use these to your advantage when you do transition. You need to get comfortable with the idea of leaving your comfort zone now, if it's something that you want to do, and having a crack at some roles that maybe you wouldn't have thought of. And networking starts now. So really appreciate what Ryan was saying. It could be another postdoc, an RA, someone you've met, someone you've connected with on LinkedIn, that actually presents you with your next opportunity. I went from the lab to the lofty heights of Big Four R&D tax consulting. So I had an office, you can't see me point, but I had an office on one of those corners there, which was pretty sweet. And I think, so, I mean, how did this come about? Well, one was networking. And I think the other thing to appreciate here is that innovation and research happens in lots of different places, and it actually often happens in a commercial setting. And businesses are often quite competitive, and they're trying to be the best that they can be in their field. So it may not look and feel like research to us, but it's innovative nonetheless. And so interestingly, that led me here, where I got to learn about the R&D tax incentive, which is really based, the legislation and guidelines are based around scientific principles. So things like hypotheses, methods, results, and conclusions. So I got to learn about the world of the R&D tax incentive, which I guess you could think of as sort of commercial grant writing. We did a bunch of other things as well. So there's an EMDG grant, which is an export grant, accelerated commercialization grant, and we did tax advice and tax defense, which is not something you would think a scientist would be doing in their next role. But again, it was the ability to take information, consolidate it, summarize it, transform it into ways that you could meet various requirements. So, grant principles and legislative guidelines and things like that. It was a really interesting time. I didn't just look at health and science, but we did look at pharma, medtech, and digital health companies. But we also worked across agriculture, mining, engineering, fast-moving consumer goods, and IT. I worked with companies with, that were startups that had less than $100,000 through to multinationals. The biggest company I worked with was probably BHP, worked with AMP, Macquarie Bank. So one day you're sitting down with, a budding entrepreneur with a new idea about a business, and the next day you were sitting across from the chief financial officer at AMP, telling them about the work that you're doing. So, claiming grants from the size of about $10,000 up to 100 million, which is kind of crazy. I moved on from there. I went to PwC for a more management style role. Here, the topical medium was the same, but I was now managing a team. I was managing the accounts more. So I was developing new skills. All the skills that you develop are around stakeholder management, project management, people management, how to manage people's expectations, how to really team now as well, manage a team, work with the team. So deliver work and be reviewing work at the same time. Again, the basis of this was all knowledge transformation and really the ability to prioritize. So every client is a paying customer, and you need to know whose tasks are more urgent and you need to deliver. So some key learnings with, hindsight, of course. Here, I think, just like Ryan was saying, all your decisions have a commercial impact. I think you're no longer, as a researcher, I think we take for granted that we have this autonomy to set our day. If you're having a bad day and you want to go a bit slow, or you want to duck out for a coffee, you generally can get away. But there are days where those minutes mean something commercially to another entity, and those could be millions of dollars. So, when the work is due, the work is due, and you've just got to find ways to push through and get it done. So the note at the bottom there is like, you still will need to work hard. And I found sometimes much harder. But I think you also will feel the recognition and a job satisfaction at the end of the day, because you can reflect that later on and you'll see it come through in your career progression when you do devote that time. Yeah, so delivering outcomes is everything in the commercial setting. That's really important. But also really importantly, you can still find fulfillment. So I really loved visiting different companies and seeing new technologies that were emerging, health or not, and trying to help them implement something that, that would be more environmentally friendly technology, or maybe it was a new way for computer processes to work faster. I like computers, so that was good. Maybe it's a mining company trying to find a more environmentally friendly way to smelt aluminium or something, but the processes are all still really interesting. So I still found really great job satisfaction, even though I wasn't necessarily partaking in science or being the one producing the science. I guess from there I got, I did sort of miss science because I was working across quite a wide range of industries. And I ended up moving across to a space which I wasn't necessarily looking for, and that was as head of research commercialization at a local biotech investment fund, and later on a secondary role, which I'll talk about. So this was really around venture capital. So now I've sort of crossed, big four consulting firms, and now I'm moving into a, almost a new part of my career, but always progressing. So whenever I tell people that I was the head of research commercialization, they always say, what does a research commercialization manager do? So I just want to walk you through kind of what a day in my life looked like. So I guess, venture capital is a space that's involved in investment, and it's often associated with large amounts of money, but it's also associated with lots of risk and new technologies. So that became the basis of my life for a while. So there's two sides to this. One is the buy side when you're in venture capital, and the other is the sell side. So my job was to bridge the two. So I was driven by an overarching goal to travel around the world, mostly Australia and the US and a little bit of APAC, searching for innovative technologies, now with a focus on biotech, so pharmaceuticals and medical technologies, and look at ways that we could maybe invest in them. So how could the technologies that are out there complement some of our existing ones, or were there new products that we could maybe license or acquire, invest in, and develop ourselves? So what did I have to do? I had to go out and build relationships, build networks, and build rapport with lots of people. I did a lot of travel, a lot of presentations. So your ability to concisely communicate complex principles into simple becomes really important here. I conducted scientific and financial due diligence using both my scientific background and my financial Big Four consulting background. That's a fancy way really of just saying I did a lot of research, and my job was to find the holes in companies, either in their tech or in their companies, that we could use to our advantage when we would seek to invest in something. I'd prepare investment briefs and I'd take those to the investment committee. When you do that, you're putting your name on it, you're putting your expertise behind it, and you're telling them that you've done it right and that you believe that this is technology that's investable. And then you're mapping pathways. So if the investment committee were to say, yes, we want to put $4 million into this, tell us how we get there. You've got to then design the commercial strategy for it. So you're looking at how the science will develop, how it will source maybe other sources of capital, what's the reg and reimbursement pathways, how will the business be structured, how will the deal be structured, and then execute those agreements, all whilst maintaining good relationships with scientists and institute and investors and all sorts of things. So it's not for the faint-hearted. But it was really rewarding, because I think the great part about that was I really felt like I was helping research meet the road, I guess. So some key learnings, I think, from this. Oh, I guess I should say that because I had built that network, we won't have time to talk about it now, but because I built that network with lots of startups and things, I did end up getting a second opportunity within the company and ran two roles concurrently. And that was as head of business development for Capital Labs, which is an equity crowdfunding platform. So think like GoFundMe, but instead of getting like early access to a backpack or an innovative pressure cooker or something, here you're actually buying equity in unlisted companies and startups, so things like ResMed started out as startups that sought that sort of funding. So key learnings, there's always new levels you can reach. So careers are progressive and you've got to keep working at them. I never thought I would get here when I was at, when I was working as a PhD student. So I think you've just got to put your best foot forward. You can master any topic with enough will and dedication. So I think one of the great things about doing a PhD or postdocing is you really learn the art of learning and you know how to dedicate yourself to particular topics. And so don't undervalue that capability. You can still be challenged scientifically, even if it is in a commercial setting, and achieve that high degree of impact I think we all want. And if in doubt, I think just walk the walk and have a go first. And you'll find that even in those first few weeks, you'll feel like you're an imposter, and slowly you'll settle into these roles and you'll master them. So don't be afraid to have a go. Transferable skills, communication was essential, relationship building. Here, we're talking about lots of good judgment and emotional intelligence. An entrepreneurial mindset. Multitasking as you progress becomes much, much more important because you're dealing with many different stakeholders, and flexibility. So you've got one idea that you've worked really, really hard on, and one day your boss says, I know you've devoted 6 months to this, but I don't want you to do it anymore. You just got to drop it and move on. So I think just aligning yourself commercially with the organization that you're working with becomes really important. Now I'm really blessed with 2 new opportunities. I'm working at And Health, which is Australia's National Digital Health Accelerator or Initiative. We're a part administrator of an MRFF-based grant called the Targeted Translational Research Accelerator. So here we are partaking in designing of the actual grant scheme. We're doing, I've just spent the last 3 months reviewing a whole bunch of grants across medical devices, pharma, and digital health. And we're now going through a deep due diligence phase. And, again, we're working with lots of researchers on one side, working with lots of corporate entities. So, there's quite a mix. And, coming full circle, there's been an opportunity that's come up at the same time. And I've now joined the business development office back at the Garvan Institute, and I'm helping them commercialize some of the technologies they have here, which I think is really exciting. And I guess both of these roles are the culmination of all of those things that I've done, and I'm now bringing all those transferable skills together. So if you can take a snapshot, or I'll distribute some of this stuff, you really want to try to work in some of that into your CVs or cover letters and really show. Because, although I've refined a lot of these skills here throughout the career, they are there during your time as a researcher. They're just not as honed. So have a think about them and think about ways that you can enhance them while you're in academia. Some key learnings is, I think looking back now, there's always a home for your skills. You've just got to be patient. You've got to work at it. You've got to have some drive. And, you've got to maybe think a little bit creatively. Sometimes there's a really nice sweet spot where, maybe you're in flow cytometry and a nice aligned job comes up. And sometimes there won't be. But there is a place for you, and you've just got to keep at it. And the learning doesn't stop. So just keep that in the back of your mind. There's no point in a career where it's going to be perfect all the time. I had some take-home messages, but I know I'm maybe a bit over time. I guess what I want to say was start shifting your focus if you're thinking about leaving to developing your transferable skills. Start networking now. I can't emphasize that enough. LinkedIn is an amazing source for that, as Ryan highlighted. Don't be afraid to try. Be humble. It's really hard in the beginning. I think, you've devoted time to progressing yourself up a certain ladder, and there will be a time when you need to transition out, and you may realize that you're at the bottom of a new ladder, which can be quite humbling. And you were once the expert in your field, and now you'll feel like a student all over again. So be humble, work hard, and the rewards will come. Research your company and align your values and purpose. If you can align your purpose to whatever the company is doing, I think you'll find fulfillment no matter what it is. Not all careers are straight lines, and I put the image there about the PhD plan because that kind of resonates. My career's gone up and down too. There are times when I've really, haven't enjoyed myself, but then there are times when I've really loved what I'm doing. And I think that journey and that development doesn't stop, because the take-home point is that, even the presenters here today, I'm sure, everyone questions their career choices because it's constantly evolving and changing. So thanks very much. And please reach out with any questions. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk about this topic. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. It's really an interesting look into the commercial career pathway. I think I had 2 questions, unless somebody else wanted to jump in. So first, I think, I wanted to know how you felt, in your academic career. When did you kind of know that you wanted to seek that entrepreneurial or just a different career pathway than academics? And second question, I was wondering, you mentioned very briefly that there were some real highlights that you enjoyed in your career. I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, okay. When did I know? I think I towards the end of my PhD, I was beginning to feel the pressure of pushing out publications and things, but I wasn't enjoying that process. And I didn't feel like the research we were doing was necessarily having an impact or actually making a great change to the body of knowledge that we were contributing to. So that started to become disheartening. And then, I mean, another half of the equation is that it wasn't by choice at all. It was presented with, I guess, a few lesser options, so short-term postdoc contracts with ambiguity about what would happen after that. I was married and we had just had our first child at the end of my PhD. So it wasn't a great scenario to be thinking about, well, I'm going to take on this postdoc role. How am I going to publish, decent papers in a year and secure funding and support my family in that time? I just couldn't see it happening. And so I, just started searching for alternatives. And, I guess that just broadened my view. And I started looking at, those, I think I was searching for research and development roles and found the R&D tax incentive, which actually led me to some known people in that space that I was actually connected to. And they helped me get my first interview. And then I went through a round of 3 interviews and like an online emotional, it was like an emotional awareness test and all sorts of stuff to jump through. But yeah, it was worth it. And the second part, the highlights, well, maybe it's more than last year, I negotiated a licensing deal for some complementary technology out of Harvard that we licensed into another technology that we're working on here, so called a saliva-based glucose biosensor. I got to travel to the US or to Boston, go to the Harvard precinct, meet with the directors of the institute there, present to them, break bread with them, negotiate a deal, subsequently. So, I mean, something like that, I just was never going to achieve, running Western blots. It's just not going to translate to something like that. Yeah. Did I answer it all?
Yeah, very well. Nothing wrong with Western blots?
No, there's not. And there's a great need, but yeah, I don't want to do one ever again.
Yeah, I can agree. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Susan, so would you be happy to share and
Joe, I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Sure.
My question was, both of the speakers mentioned using LinkedIn for networking. What are your views about Twitter? Because that's what I've been more exposed to in my area.
Me personally, I don't use it, although I know a lot of other professionals do. It's a great way for exposure. I think maybe I'm just too old or can't be bothered to have that many social media platforms running at the same time. But I mean, the more exposure you can have and the more connections you can build, I can't see a negative. Ryan?
Yeah, I just haven't found that the Twitter or the others give you the same connection with businesses. So, you've got to follow businesses. Don't get me wrong, on LinkedIn, you've got to be active, you've got to follow businesses, you've got to follow the right people, make comments every now and again, post yourself, but it's a professional space. And I find even myself as a sales guy, if I go on LinkedIn, I can see what other people are doing and how the market's moving. And I think that's really important, where you may not get that on Twitter.
Okay, that's actually a really good point. So yeah, thanks.
That's a great question. Great. Now, we might move forward to Susan.
Just share my screen. Okay, hopefully hopefully we can all see that. So my name's Susan Tan and I'm a medical writer. I work at an agency called Envision Pharma Group, and all three of the pictures here are actually me. So a little bit more about me. So medical writing and the medical field is actually my second career. I previously did engineering work at wastewater treatment plants, and there's a picture there. In 2014, I went for a career change. I did a PhD in G protein coupled receptor pharmacology. And my intention from day one was always to apply for a role in industry, in pharmaceutical or biotechnology industry. So naturally, as someone who has previously undergone a career change, when it came time for me to think about what I'll be doing next after my PhD, naturally I responded in a very calm and collected way, which looked something like this. So it actually came as a bit of a shock to me to hear that a lot of PhD graduates have a difficult time finding jobs. I guess I kind of expected that it would be easy, that PhD graduates, highly intelligent, hardworking, highly qualified people, why would it be difficult to find a job? So this actually became quite daunting, and the language people use around it, like the word transition, like you have to transition, like do you have to become somebody else, or what does this really involve? It sounded very daunting to me. So my initial reaction, of course, was shock. But once I actually looked into what I need to do to actually get a role in industry, I actually realized that it's not really that hard. It's not really that bad. It can actually be quite an exciting time, and a time when you're learning a lot of new things and developing yourself. And when I looked into what I could do, I began with job search websites, as you do, to find out what can I actually do with a PhD. And for quite a while, pretty much the only job I could find was medical science liaison. It seemed to be all I could find in the field of medical science for PhD graduates. And so medical science liaisons, they basically educate doctors about drugs. They are experts in a particular drug or disease area. And it sounded like quite a good role, like it's a lot of science communication. And as someone who likes to talk about science a lot more than I really like to be behind a bench, that seemed like probably a pretty good option for me. And what I discovered is that there actually do exist training courses for PhD graduates who want to get an industry role. And it was actually pretty exciting and empowering to discover that this exists, because it does seem so daunting and impossible. How do you actually get a job in industry? Well, you can actually prepare yourself by enrolling in these courses. And I did one in medical science liaison training. But what I also discovered later on is that actually MSL, like that's not the only role that exists. Actually, there are other roles. And of course, you've heard from the other speakers as well that, well, there are other roles besides MSL. So that's good news. You actually do have options if you want to transition to industry. And I actually found another industry training course that you can do. This one's called the Cheeky Scientist Association, and this provides training courses for PhD graduates to learn about getting industry roles. It is expensive. I think it was around $500 US, so it's not cheap. But if, like me, you're desperate to get into industry and terrified of being unemployed for a long time, and yeah, to me, it was worth it. So if it's something you can afford, then it may be worthwhile doing some of these industry courses. The way they sell it is that 1 week's pay would pretty much cover these fees. Like if you can get a job you know, a week or two earlier than you otherwise would have because you did this course, well, it's paid itself off because it's better than being unemployed or, you know, being in the last 6 months of the PhD with no income at all. So, you know, it may be worthwhile or something to look into. But one of the many recommendations that I got from this group was actually to get very active on LinkedIn. And everyone so far has been talking about LinkedIn and the importance of building connections. And it's through LinkedIn that I was able to find connections with people in the Australasian Medical Writers Association. I was even able to attend a meeting to meet some medical writers and find out more about the role. And like you may be sort of a bit scared or reluctant to connect to people you don't know on LinkedIn. It can seem a bit daunting, but the truth is that actually a lot more people than I expected did respond to me when I reached out. I often try to find people with one common connection, but I've connected with a lot of people through LinkedIn and yeah, managed to find out more about the role and really build up my network in that way. And one thing that I did find out through my connections is that you can build an online portfolio of your work. And that's what we have in the right-hand side here, this wix.com. So when I was applying for a medical writing role, I was advised to have an online portfolio of different publications that I've written, because if you do want to be a medical writer, it's not just about manuscripts. Like, you're not going to get a medical writing role just from having a big list of manuscripts you've published in your CV. Like, medical writing is so much more diverse than that. You do all sorts of publication types, from, you know, posters and oral presentations. I even do plain language summaries for just a broad audience. That there are all sorts of things you do. And if you work at an advertising agency, they really value having creativity. So in medical writing, you need creativity and versatility. You don't just sit in a corner and pump out manuscripts. So having an online portfolio enables you to actually show employers that you can, firstly, you can build a website, you can build something nice looking, you have a bit of creativity, and you have that versatility, and you can do all sorts of different types of documents. So I even included things like standard operating procedures. I'd written lab protocols to show that I can write anything from, you know, an oral presentation to a lab protocol to a manuscript to a poster to show that diversity. And so the website like Wix, that's just a free website builder. It's quite easy. So that's one way you can put together an online portfolio. And you can also make it password protected as well, which is important because you may not want the world to see everything that's on it. So that was stage 2 of my transition story, was actually taking action and doing something to prepare myself for a role in industry. And stage 3, actually applying for a role in industry. So the very first job that I applied for was actually with Envision Pharma Group. It was an associate medical writer position, and quite unbelievably, I actually got the very first job I applied for. So it can happen, maybe with a combination of luck and also skills and all the things that I did do, like the training courses, building connections, having a referral from someone already at the company. There's a lot of things that you can do to help improve your chances. But of course, there's always a bit of an element of luck too. But a bit about being a medical writer, it is a very steep learning curve at first. That, you know, even though you do a lot of writing throughout your PhD, you write manuscripts, you write a thesis, you know how to write, but there's a lot of processes that are very particular to do with clinical trials. Like you've got to for example, have IP approval for things. You've got to have quality control checks. You've got to document author contributions. And there's a lot of extra things you need to do that you need to learn about. But that's something you learn on the job. So key skills, obviously writing. A writing test was part of the job application process. Obviously you need to do literature research, referencing, and we should all know that from our PhDs, and obviously the software skills like Word, PowerPoint. I use GraphPad, Prism and Acrobat as well. But what I've highlighted here is project management and people management. And when I first got into medical writing, I sort of imagined I would pretty much just be writing, but actually project management and people management is really important and really fundamental. And a lot of our writing skills are actually used in writing diplomatic emails to people to try to get them to actually review documents, and just having that good balance, you know, between expressing the urgency of a project, but at the same time being diplomatic and kind about it as well. So it takes writing skills to follow up with authors, as well as the writing skills that you use for the actual publications. So here are some surprising facts about medical writing. So the first thing which I did touch on is if you have a PhD, you pretty much have the skills you need to be a medical writer. You can write, you did a thesis, you can do research, like you can do it, basically. Everything that you don't know about medical writing, it's something you can learn on the job. So I really put my PhD experience into practice. Really, like a lot of what I learned during my PhD, I do apply, but it is the skills that I apply, the skills in research and referencing, and just the ability to understand scientific literature and to interpret it. So I put my PhD in the experience section of my resume, not under education, because your PhD is relevant. It is experience, so it should be in the experience section. Another interesting fact is actually a lot of pharmaceutical companies don't employ medical writers. So I was surprised to hear this, that they actually contract out medical writing to agencies. So if you're looking for a role in medical writing, don't limit yourself to just looking at pharmaceutical companies. That actually you need to be looking for medical writing agencies or advertising agencies. And as I mentioned, yeah, managing people and project timelines is super important. And medical writers do a lot more than just manuscripts. You do abstracts, posters, oral presentations, plain language summaries, educational materials. If you work at an advertising agency, you may also do promotional materials. I've written surveys lately, so it's pretty much whatever the client wants written, anything internal or external, that's something that you can do and that you can help with. And another interesting fact is that medical writers are actually not publication authors. Actually might seem a bit funny because you wrote the manuscript, why aren't you an author? Well, actually there are specific criteria for authorship that are laid out, and part of that criteria is actually to have involvement in the design or conduct of a study. So if you're writing a clinical trial paper, well, if you weren't involved in the actual trial, you weren't administering the drugs, you didn't design the trial, you didn't analyze the data, you're just writing up the results that you're given, well, you don't really qualify for authorship. So that's something that you just need to be aware of. Like, don't become a medical writer with an expectation that you're going to be an author. But occasionally you can be in systematic review type articles. Sometimes medical writers are authors, but generally not. But another key learning that I wanted to point out is that transitioning to industry can be a two-way street. Like the way people talk about it is that, oh, if you don't get a role in industry, it's 100% your fault as a PhD graduate. And really that's not true. That actually a lot of people in industry, they don't really know what PhDs are all about. They might have you know, maybe they've watched The Big Bang Theory and they think, oh yeah, that Sheldon Cooper guy, yep, he has a PhD. Well, that's what you're like. That's what PhD graduates are like. Yeah, actually, that's not what we're all like. Actually, we all have a lot of really valuable skills and abilities that we can bring to the role, and you can demonstrate your value and the value of your experience. So that's something just to bear in mind as well. Like if you do feel a bit disheartened, whatever, in your job search, remember that sometimes people maybe don't understand the value of your PhD. So don't blame yourself 100% if things don't go your way. So a bit of a guide for those transitioning to industry roles. So there are some factors you can control and some you can't. The timing of job opportunities, the location, like it might not always, you know, suit you. But if you do everything you can that is within your control to try to give you the best possible chance of getting a job, then that's what you need to focus on. And a big part of that is improving your online presence and your knowledge of the role. Like you know, if you're building connections with people, you're joining societies, attending network events, you know, if you're showing initiative, you're doing all of this, you're reaching out to people, and obviously have, you know, a good resume and cover letter, then there's no reason why you won't get a job, you know, in a reasonable amount of time. But one bit of advice, of course, never submit a half-baked job application. It should never say, you know, to whom it may concern or anything like that. Like you always go to the effort of finding out about the company, researching the company, find out the name of the person to address your cover letter to, try to get a referral from someone who's already at that company. So reach out to people at the company, ask if you can mention their name in your cover letter. Say, this person encouraged me to apply for this role. You could even ask for a referral. You can reach out to people on LinkedIn, share your portfolio with them, see if they want to recommend you for a role. And if you don't feel confident about doing that, just one little bit of information you might want to bear in mind is that some companies actually offer their staff financial incentives for recommending people for a role. So if they recommend someone for a role, that person gets the job and they perform well, pass their probation, they can actually get money for that. So just bear in mind, if you do reach out to people on LinkedIn asking for referrals, yeah, there may be something in it for them as well. So another, I guess a related bit of advice really is it's not what you know, it's who you know. So reaching out to people, joining groups, get as much advice and support as you can. And if you can afford any of those industry preparation training courses, it does also provide you with a really good network of people, discussion forums, groups and connections, and a lot of people to support you on that journey and to give you advice and experience to help you along the way. So if the final point is to show initiative, attend events, do the courses if you can, like just show that you know what the role is all about and that you're serious about this role. So that's my key point, I guess. And yeah, so we'll open up to questions.
Thank you very much, Susan. The deep look into medical writing. If anyone has questions, post them in the chat, but I will jump in. So it seems like there's a continual theme of LinkedIn being the go-to platform. I wanted to ask you, what was your strategy when you first started looking and linking with people? And second to that is what was most successful in your hands in your LinkedIn networking?
I guess what I started with was looking for common connections, because it's much easier to reach out to someone and say, oh, I see you know this person, or I know them too, and just start out with something pretty basic like that and just ask to connect. Probably don't go immediately into, can you give me a referral for a job? That's probably a bit much for someone you don't know. But just to begin with something simple, something you have in common, like a common connection, that I found to be the most successful approach.
So then I have a question about the online profile that you mentioned. How different is that to LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Because with LinkedIn, you can also build your profile and have links to your publications and all that available.
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking more broadly about online profile in general. So just making sure, say you don't have any, rude pictures of yourself on Facebook and things like that. Like try Googling your own name, see what comes up, make sure that there isn't anything that you don't want employers to see, because the employers, they will look you up online. They will want to see, what is your Facebook like what sort of person is this person? So if you have some grotesque images on Facebook or something, then they'll think that's what you're like. So just making sure that you don't have anything you don't want employers to see that comes up on Google.
Something actionable. Everyone to check their Facebook, take away all the problematic photos. Fantastic. Thanks, Susan. If there's no more questions, we might move on to Joseph Cox, recruiter. And I'm sure he has a few things on LinkedIn to say. I think your first advice to me was hurry up and get more than 500 people on your LinkedIn. You're not doing a good enough job. And I think that's served me well.
Yeah, sounds like me, to be honest. So, okay. I just need Susan to stop sharing her screen so I can send mine. Perfect. Thank you all. Share. Can everyone see that now? Yep, cool. All right. Yeah, thanks for the invite. I think the industry as a whole has a bit of an issue with finding new people moving into industry, specifically more medical affairs, given that's my specialty. But I'll run you through it. So I guess a little bit more about ProClinical. First up, so we're headquartered in London, out of the UK, one of the world's largest sole-focused life sciences recruitment companies. Offices all over the shop. I'm based obviously in the Sydney office. We've got another Australian office in Melbourne, and plenty across Asia, the US, Europe, and obviously the UK as well. So ProClinical as a business and myself, really good, strong relationships with a broad range of companies, and that ranges all the way from that big global pharma, blue chip businesses and device businesses, all the way down to small startups, biotechs, and certainly more niche areas like psychedelic medicine and medicinal cannabis companies, which is certainly a growing area within medical affairs, at least. And we cover everything, all from entry level, so people looking to move into industry for their first role, all the way up to C-suite. So about me, so I've been, as you can probably tell by my accent, originally from the UK. Although apparently I'm losing it, I don't hear it. Been in Australia for 4 years now. Total, I had another 2 years in the UK doing life sciences recruitment, specialising more in that medical affairs, health tech and market access functions, and obviously working across ANZ at the moment and Europe as well. So there's a list of some recent placements that have happened over the last couple of months. You see it's a fairly broad range across PV, market access, and probably more medical affairs, to be honest there. But that being my specialty, that doesn't probably surprise anyone. So yeah, moving into industry is certainly a daunting task, I'm sure, for a lot of people looking to move out of academia. And I guess the first piece of advice I give everyone is to really do your research. What roles are you interested in? What verticals interest you most? What do you understand about the duties and responsibilities of the role that you're applying for? The first interview question you'll likely get when you get to interview is, what do you understand about the role? If you can't answer that question exactly, it's unlikely you'll probably go any further. So I suppose a good example that I've had a lot is people, moving into looking for MSL roles and getting interviews and them asking, or even me asking, to be honest, what do you understand about the role? And they say, oh, it's basically a sales role. I'll be telling you to go away and do some more research, and they'll do the same, because although there are similarities, it's very different. You know, you're not KPI'd in the amount of revenue you bring into the company. It's good to understand your motivation. So what's drawing you to industry? Why do you want to leave academia? And then why are you interested in that specific role? Is it down to the compensation that's on offer? Is it down to the products, the specific therapy area that you're interested in? A good understanding of your transferable skills. So, you know, with every advert or job spec that you'll be reading, they'll have a set of requirements they look for in the role. Now, obviously, not having industry experience, it's unlikely you're going to have the majority of them. But if you're able to line up, so for example, again, MSL is a good example. So I'm sure during your PhD, you've done a number of presentations, both nationally or internationally, or different symposia. There's strong communication skills there, and, you know, there's the ability to, you know, relay scientific information to varying different audiences. So, you know, when you're going out to meet a GP and you're having a scientific conversation, it's going to be less detailed to more of a molecular level than if you're meeting with an oncologist, for example. They're going to know a lot more about sort of that specific cancer strain than perhaps a general GP will. A good idea is to understand the company and which companies you are interested in. So if your PhD was in a certain therapy area, let's say cell therapy, because I've got a roll on with them at the moment. If you had a strong interest in oncology, hematology, and cell therapy, you know, what companies have strong portfolios, what companies have strong pipelines, which ones are making, you know, new waves in that space. For example, in cell therapy, there's only one listed product in Australia, and that's Chimera through Novartis. But again, you know, Gilead with Kite Pharma, hot on their tails with lots of new cell therapy products coming through. You know, what are the company's reputation like within industry? That's sort of a talking point for another day, but I think it's good to get a general idea of how they're viewed within the industry. You know, are they based in the same state as you, and will they consider virtual working? You know, with COVID happening, it's, you know, it's highly likely a lot of businesses are going to be a lot more open to remote based working, virtual working, especially when it comes to KOL engagement. Also, what are your salary expectations? I find I ask that question to a lot of you know, PhD students and postdocs that are looking to move into industry, and 9 times out of 10 it's I don't know. So I think it's really important to understand, and I think it was alluded to earlier, that you really need to know your worth. And, you know, again, it's been mentioned numerous times earlier, if you know someone who works in industry, reach out and speak to them. And I suppose that brings me quite nicely onto my next point, which is the networking piece. Now, I know that's been brought up by everyone throughout the talk. So, you know, LinkedIn is such a great networking platform, and I think a lot of people fail and don't really understand that it is a networking platform. You're there to connect with like-minded people that you don't necessarily know, you've never met, you've never spoken to. I do it every single day, and speak to different industry professionals and get to know them, get to know their backgrounds. And I think one of the benefits for, especially within, if you're looking to move to medical affairs, is these people are all, you know, scientists by background. They enjoy speaking science. Their job is to go out and speak science to key opinion leaders and healthcare professionals. And when it comes to, you know, looking to who to connect with, obviously people that you want to, you know, who are doing the role that you're interested in, to get a really firm understanding of that position, because that's the best way you're going to learn, you know, what that role does, by speaking to people that are currently doing it. And everyone within the medical affairs function, and that could go all the way up to medical directors. Now I know, again, that probably sounds like a fairly daunting task, super senior people, but again, those are the ones that really decide how their teams grow. So a line manager like a medical director or a medical manager will go to HR or talent acquisition and say, I need an MSL, go and find me one. I'm happy to consider people that are coming from a PhD background or a postdoc. Then HR and talent acquisition, 9 times out of 10, will have a checklist of what they're looking for. So it'll be, 1 to 2 years MSL experience, and they'll always consider someone that has MSL experience. But if you have a relationship with a line manager and they can put in a good word for you, or you can send them your CV directly, it won't get lost at the info@the-company or HR@the-company email address. Because CVs without industry experience are very difficult to stand out. And I have a slide on CVs that I'll touch upon later. Networking isn't just sort of sending messages over LinkedIn or through email. Ask for their number. Have a good conversation, or meet up with them for a coffee. COVID's kind of relaxed now, so you can now go out and meet for coffees, and that way you also get a really good understanding of what the culture is like at that company as well. And again, culture is something I will touch upon shortly. And like I said, getting in front of a hiring manager will carry a lot more weight than just having a LinkedIn connection. If you can say that I've got a good relationship with Joe Blogs at whatever company, that will go a long way, because networking and knowing who, it's more who you know than what you know, especially in medical affairs. It's a small market. So when it comes to LinkedIn and networking, I've been asked what's the best way to kind of go about it. A lot of people will go in with the tact of, I'm looking for a job, can you help me? And the only person you're going to build a relationship like that is someone like me, because it's my job. But other useful conversation starters. So when I said do your research, go onto the company website and have a look at particular therapy areas or drugs or products, or what pipeline they've got coming through, and have a conversation. Susan alluded to any common connections you may have. Are there any particular launches coming up of products that you're super interested in and want to have a conversation about? What's the org structure within that business? How does that role fit within that specific vertical? Ask them how they got started in industry. Everyone had to go into industry at some point somehow. So, ask them to pick their brain. Like I said, these people are 9 times out of 10 always happy to have a conversation. I've never been told to leave me alone, go away. Everyone's always happy to have at least a quick chat. So moving on to the CV, like I said, it's very difficult to stand out without any industry experience. So it's important to structure your CV in a way that really highlights your strengths and the weaknesses. So qualification, especially in medical affairs, is a big selling point. There are conversations or arguments, which depending on how you look at it, that qualifications shouldn't have as much weight, but they do. In real life, they just do. And every majority of MSL roles you'll see, they are always looking for someone that is PhD qualified. So if you're able to specify that from the get-go, you've knocked off one checklist checkpoint on the very first page. And I would specifically put in the therapy area of which your study was in. So if you're applying for an MSL oncology role, make sure they know you've done a PhD in oncology. If it's respiratory, whatever. A lot of people that, again, don't have industry experience will put in experiences that are completely unrelated to the job. So whether that's working in retail or, working in Macca's or something, not that I'm bagging on it because I've done both, but it's irrelevant. They're not going to, it's nothing to do with it. In terms of an introduction or, a short blurb about yourself, always highlight your transferable skills and suitability for the role as well. So I'm guessing that during your PhD studies, you would have dealt with numerous healthcare professionals, key opinion leaders within certain areas. So you already have a pretty good network of KOLs you can tap into. Like I alluded to earlier, the national and international presentations, there is that strong communication, organization, presentation skills that are important for medical affairs. It's an externally facing role. Ensure to alter your CV for each specific role as well. And I suppose, again, publications, although were probably a big part of your experiences, they won't carry much, if any, weight in your application. Now, with publications, if you've done a lot, I would suggest, like 2-3 pages worth, I would suggest having it as a separate supporting document, not having it as on your CV. They're not going to read through them. The only time they'll read through them is if they ask, do you have a publication list? And again, I've never had a client tell me, can you share me their publications? Because like I said, it doesn't carry any weight. So what are clients looking for? Obviously, it based from client to client, company to company, role to role. A high level of emotional intelligence is super important. Understanding where your strengths are, understanding where your weaknesses are, and understanding where, what transferable skills you have suitable for that role. A good thorough understanding of the role, as I discussed earlier, and the duties and responsibilities of that position, as well as the company therapy area portfolio and pipeline. This goes back to doing your research and understanding, what products, what phases they're at. Do they have any preclinical trials going on? Where are there certain products and what phase of study are they currently sitting in? Someone that is a very good team player, especially in medical affairs, is a very cross-functional role. You're dealing with market access, you're dealing with PV, you're dealing with the clinical research team, you're dealing with the regulatory team. So a good team player is key, as well as someone that can work autonomously. Especially as an MSL, you're on the road a lot. You're going out and having these scientific exchange conversations with KOLs and healthcare professionals. And that leads me to the next point quite nicely, as a strong communicator and able to work cross-functionally. Someone that is very personable, approachable, adaptable, and more importantly, humble. If you're going in with an ego, thinking, you're one of the best to ever do it, and no one knows more than you, it's really not going to go well for you. I've had a few candidates that have been like that, and as brutal as it is, I've been upfront with them from feedback and said, look, that's exactly why they weren't moved forward. And it's gotten to the point where, I've had candidates, looking that possess those opposites of those traits, that are looking and still haven't found anything after a few years. So it really is important to make sure that you come across really well. And like I said, culture fit is such a huge part of being successful. I've placed MSLs that have beaten people with 2 to 3 years experience that haven't had any, because they're a much better culture fit for that business. And it will come down to personality, how you present yourself, how you carry yourself. So culture fit is super important. And I know it's difficult to really put into words what company has the best culture, because they're all very different. And at that point, which is why networking is such a good tool for when you're looking for new roles, you really get to understand by meeting people that work with those businesses how the culture comes across. So a few helpful websites and industry bodies, and again, this is probably more geared toward medical affairs, but there are some that can be adhered to perhaps clinical and regulatory and quality. So you've got APA. So APA is the medical affairs industry body. If you're looking to move into medical affairs, that is going to be one of the best places to network. There are some really fantastic professional people that are very down to earth. The current vice president I know very well, and he has a he's very focused on bringing new talent into industry. So I would suggest going on APA, finding out who everyone is, connect with them, reach out to them. A lot of the people will happily act as mentors in terms of your job search, which will be invaluable. You've got ARCS, which is Association of Regulatory and Clinical Scientists. They actually throw a conference, which is on the 7th to the 9th of June this year. And that's another really good networking event, but also they have talks throughout the day on industry trends, market updates, and how Australia are going with building it as a powerhouse for life sciences and clinical trials. So that's a really good place to attend, and I'll be there as well. Pharma in Focus is a really good industry news website, and would be a good place for you to pick up news articles to then use as networking tools. Someone mentioned earlier about using social media in terms of their networking, and I actually saw a really good article on how MSLs are starting to use social networking and using Twitter to get in touch with KOLs and healthcare professionals, which I thought was a really cool, interesting, different way of doing it. So I expect that to kind of grow a little bit in the future. You've also got the MTAA, which is the medical devices industry body. They have a 2-day conference every year. You've got Oz Biotech, which will give you a good overview of what's going on in the biotech industry. And there's been some talks about courses that you can do. Science to Life is one that ProClinical has partnered with. And really, if you're unsure about what area you're best suited to or you're interested in, they put together a really good fundamentals course, which is $275. Pretty, I mean, I wouldn't say cheap, but it's not expensive compared to others that are out there. And it's got a number of different industry professionals that have taken part, and a few from APA as well. And it gives you a really good insight into, different teams, where your experiences or how you'd be suitable for each team. They've got some really good career interviews. I'm sure you probably all understand the drug development cycle, but for those that don't, there's a good overview of that as well, and it gives you an opportunity to connect with different companies. And they also have a networking a networking platform, which is another sort of another area for you to network outside of LinkedIn. And then if you're really specific and set on medical affairs, they have another short course that allows you to kind of really define your stream, whether it's PV, MSL, clinical ops, med info, reg affairs, and you get to build a profile, learn to negotiate salary, get networked, spend a virtual week in the role. And it's a really useful tool. As you can see, these two testimonies from two people that have done it. Sandra, who's mentioned there, Sandra Owen, she's the CEO. Again, another great person to be connected with, given her industry background. So I suppose a few takeaway messages from the presentation would be making sure that you're prepared for a game of patience and persistence. As it's been alluded to earlier by previous presenters, it's a very competitive market. There are, well, I'm not even going to put a number on it, but there are so many postdocs, PhD people looking to move into industry. It's really important to find ways to stand out, to be networked, to be connected. And obviously networking is going to be a huge takeaway message from this. And I think throughout the whole, every presentation today. Do your research, understand the role and transferable skills, and really know your strengths and weaknesses. I apologize if the the presentation wasn't as creative as perhaps the others. That's not one of my strong suits, but if anyone has any questions, or feel free to connect with me, drop me an email, give me a call, drop me a text, and be more than happy to field any questions if anyone has any right now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe, for real recruitment perspective. If no one has any questions, I've got one quick one that should be pretty useful to everyone. At what point in their job search, I guess just job search, should they reach out to a recruiter like you? Would you say, thinking about it, or do a bit of research and then maybe a month or so later reach out?
I wouldn't say there's a specific amount of time. I mean, look, you know, I guess it depends on the recruiter that you speak to. You know, I'm happy to talk to people from the very start, from when they need assistance on, you know, people, for example, specific people they can reach out to, or any specific advice. I'm more than happy to look at CVs, alter them where I can, introduce them to people. You know, my network on LinkedIn is pushing towards 9,000 people now. So, you know, it's probably likely that if you're looking to connect to someone, I'm already connected to them in medical affairs. I think I've even introduced you to a few people so far. So look, you know, it's up to you whether you want to reach out to a recruiter straight away, or, you know, do some research and come back. I think doing some research straight away obviously shows really good initiative. And, you know, if I can have a conversation without saying, do you know what an MSL is, and they tell me no, that doesn't really show, you know, super interest, or give me a lot of faith that, you know, the ambition is really there to move into an MSL role. Do you know what I mean? So I wouldn't say there's a set amount of time. It's entirely up to you.
Well, I think we're a bit over time.
One quick question. So thank you, everyone. So it's very great talks. So maybe Ryan or Joseph can say, I have noticed in industry, people are not staying at one place for a longer time. Like last year they were at Merck, or next year somewhere. Why is that?
Good question. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say for certain. I think, you know, average tenure, I would say, within medical affairs is circa 2 to 3 years. And I think that's down to once you've kind of stayed at a company. So a lot of MSLs are therapeutically aligned. So they're going to have one product or one therapy area that they're looking after. After 2-3 years, it's likely that a competitor or someone else is going to have a more innovative product. So, you know, a good example would be oncology or hematology. You're working in the oncology, hematology, you know, 2-3 years later, Chimera comes out, and that's cell therapy, super innovative, lots of people want to work on it, and then Gilead start doing it. So there's only a certain amount of companies that do it. So, and obviously as MSLs, they're scientists, right? They're more concerned about the products and the patients, rather than, I mean, money's always a great thing. If you can get a pay rise, go for your life. And I guess one of the benefits of going for a recruiter is the more money you get, the more money I'll get. So I'll always endeavor to get you the best deal I absolutely can. But I wouldn't be able to say for certain why people only stick around for a short amount of time. It could be that, you know, they've been approached for a better role. They've been headhunted by a previous line manager. It could be that their current line manager hates them. You know, I wouldn't say there's always a certain answer as to why people have left. I wouldn't say, in my experience at least, I wouldn't say that lots of people are leaving after 1 to 2 years. I think the reasons they leave are down to the science, at least 9 times out of 10 from what I've seen.
Okay, thank you.
It's the nature of business as well, right? It's not the way in academia. We tend to stick with a lab for a long time, but outside of academia, the nature of business is if you want to get promoted or if you want to move, it's easier to do so externally. A lot of the case. So 100%. When you want to move, you move. And because you've already made the move to from academia to industry, you're not afraid to move again. I certainly followed the science and where I thought I would be better suited and find a little bit more niche. But look at Chris's CV and what he presented. Every step he's moving up and up and up, and the quickest way to do that is often externally.
And I mean, when you first start a role, wherever you are, you're going to sit down with your line manager and go through a personal development plan. And, you know, if you say, you know, in 2 years' time, I want to be a senior MSL, and 2 years' time that doesn't come around, and then I give you a call and say, look, I've got a senior MSL that you're perfect for. Do you fancy it? It's another 15K with additional responsibilities. Why would you say no? You know, so yeah, I think there's one reason why.
I think if I could comment, in some of these bigger organizations, especially the matrix organizations, the level you get in on is kind of I guess the elevators will go all at the same pace in some of the places, and they've got very specific like annual review processes when promotions are rolled out. You've got to meet certain requirements. It's very, very structured. And so one way to speed up that elevator is to move to a competitor or to another organization and get yourself the promotion, right? If you've got the skills and you've demonstrated the capability and you don't want to wait, you know, another year for that review period to come around, you can make that happen for yourself. The other reason that people move is because over time you might find that your priorities change. You know, either the company doesn't fit, you don't fit their culture anymore, or they don't fit your culture anymore, or the purposes don't align. You know, people do have professional falling out, like you know, as well. You know, so sometimes you just don't fit the role anymore. Maybe you've expanded beyond it, or they, you know, they don't fit you, and you've just got to go and make something happen. You know, you're not necessarily always on a 4-year contract, or, you know, something like that. It might be you're on a 6-month contract, and they're testing you out. Yeah, lots of different reasons.
Hi everyone, Sharma here. Just want to ask a question. Could be a very straightforward question, because we as a PhD, we invested our time in research, but there will be people who just came out from their bachelor's of science or bachelor's of some medical sciences, and they will go and join the industry. And of course, within 1 or 2 years, they will gain the experience specific to the job. And then and as a PhD, someone coming as a fresher, how well does this compare in the industry, and how well PhD get their recognition, or what a PhD can do to maintain its recognition when he or she enters in the industry as a fresher, of course, for the first time, and what hurdles we may have, and if you can give us some tips that we can use that first year to learn all those things and do much better and better always. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
I'll jump on the first one. I think what Joseph presented, where he said be humble, comes into play in that instance. So you do have a PhD and you do have skills. Chris has written in the comments there, know your worth. It's absolutely the case, but it also depends on what job you're going for. And for me, I was actually in the middle of writing my PhD, so I couldn't go for the postdoc route. I went for the research assistant route because that's what I could get, even though I'd done my time as PhD. It's not that simple, I don't think, when you move to industry. A PhD is a good thing. It's an asset, it's an experience, but it's not the be all and end all, along with a list of publications. So it depends on the role. If someone's sitting in that role for 3 or 4 years who have a bachelor's,